Hello everyone, so my name is Brice Ammar-Kodhja, maybe you've seen me before. I'll be moderating the discussion tonight. Thank you very much to Hexagram for the invitation. Thank you Gisèle and Laser 13 for the invitation as well. And thank you, all of you, beautiful guest speakers tonight. So we're gonna have 10 minutes each for presentations. So please give a warm welcome to Sandeep Bhagwati, Carly Zitter. Yeah. Applause. Carly Zitter. Anna Revakovic. And Martin Beauregard that's going to be online with us today. So we're going to proceed now in order, starting with Anna, then it's going to be Carly, then Martin, and then we're going to end up with Sandeep, and then we're going to have a 45 minutes talk all together for question answers, provocations. So, yeah, here we go.
That's it? That's it. Don't start the 10 minutes yet. Because I would like to first say thank you to Gisèle and Nina for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. And thank you, Brice, as well. And thank you, all the panelists. So, because it's a 10 minutes, I have to be super fast. So, I'm going to present you a collaborative project that I did that deals with the diminishing water sources and looks at alternative method of collecting water from fog, which is a research that I undertook as part of my PhD research at the hydrodynamics laboratory at the École Polytechnique in Paris, where I work with two scientists, Camille Duprat and Jean-Marc Chaumas. So water is diminishing at an unprecedented way, and for many factors, including overconsumption, agriculture, pollution, and of course climate change, among many others. And what you just saw, it is actually water collected from the fog on Mount Bousmagida in Morocco, where basically it's the largest fog collecting site in the world that delivers water to 5 villages. And collecting water from fog is very important in the areas that are very dry, so there's no or little precipitation and no access or not easy access to underground water, and where fog really becomes the only source of water for plants, animals, and humans. And collecting water from fog is not, let's say, pertinent in all parts of the world. I mean, because if we have other water sources, but fog is very important. Collecting water from fog is very important where there are cold currents and warm, humid air, and that's in those parts of the world that frequent fog events happen and fog is abundant, and that's where it makes sense to collect water from fog. But fog is really a cloud, so there's no difference between clouds in the skies and the fog. And basically it's composed of the small condensed water droplets that are big enough not to evaporate back to the atmosphere and small enough to stay suspended in the air and not be brought down by gravity in the form of the rain. So we collect water from fog by putting mesh nets perpendicular to winds and using Rochelle fabrics, which is the cheapest lace fabric produced that we know from fruits and vegetables bags that we buy. And when the wind brings the condensed small water droplets against the panel, then the water droplets coalesce and gravity brings them down to the gutters at the bottom. Here I arrived to the moment, but the problem with these meshes is that they have a tendency to clog up, and this clogging up prevents basically drainage. So here we arrive to the question that I participated in. So I participated in the question, in the scientific question of how do we collect water from fog more efficiently. So perhaps it's not evident because I wasn't introduced, I am an artist, but I collaborated with scientists. And this is the question that I participated in. And thanks to the art and science collaboration, we came up with a different proposition of collecting water from fog with parallel, flexible, vertical fibers and threads of fibers. Instead of using the mesh, which is grid-like, this is a new proposition that we came up with. And this proposition came from a mental image of a forest that really happened, was created during creative interaction between physicist Camille Duprat and myself. And we can talk about it, what that means maybe later. So based on this research, both artistic and scientific at the same time, because art has contributed to the new idea of the science, and at the same time, scientists have participated in the creation of the artworks. 3 art installation and a prototype of the power cells were created here. Because of the timing, I will be very quickly skipping through 3 installations. So the first one, Through the Looking Mist, is a video projection of a video in which obviously a water droplet becomes bigger than your head, in which you see a video that was captured with a fast camera, which can capture up to 10,000 images per second, which scientists use a lot in their experiments. And basically capturing that amount of images allows you to see things that we cannot see with our human eye. So this video was the first piece that we did together. And really it was about observing water behavior of water droplets on parallel flexible fibers, where we can see that they start coalescing, meaning grow bigger. Then they create capillary bridges, as you can see, which basically bring 2 adjacent fibers together and create water columns. And then we also looked at different geometries. So for example, triangulated threads, where between triangulated threads, we were able to have a thin water film, which has a great ability to absorb incoming water droplets. And even that I'm super short on time, I will leave you here in suspension to watch a creation of a 1 single water drop. And another video installation is Misty Way, which is a video installation with 3 video projectors mapped on the screens made from parallel fibers that involve walking 120 kilometers between 2 threaded rods. And I did it in collaboration with students from La Rochelle University. And basically we worked again with a fast camera, even with larger magnification than before, so the water droplets become light droplets captured by the screens, and when made from parallel fibers, and when the water droplets go through, they splash on the floor and the walls, creating very immersive environment. Here is just a very short fragment of the video documentation. And for this piece, we also collaborated with electronic music composer from Amsterdam, Daniel Schorno, who created a composition for this piece. But it's too much light and too short, so I'm going to proceed to the last installation. This is a speed presentation. Nephelograph, missed impression, the third and last installation before I'm going to be cut off. It's basically a cloud machine, so composed of multiple plexiglass boxes in which we insert ultrasonic misters that break the surface of the water and create a turbulence which is then bounced against a transparent plaque and pushed forward by the back ventilators through the honeycomb filters, which creates a unified fog or cloud at the exit. And during the first presentation of that piece at the Cité Internationale des Arts à Paris, we collaborated with kids from the primary school and asked them to write short poems to the clouds, and then we used these poems we used machine to project these poems letter by letter and then dissipated in the wind. And the second presentation of that piece during the Nuit Blanche involved the control of both misters and the fence at the back, which allowed us greater control of the different formations of cloud. And this is the last really video that I'm going to show you. And what was, again, we work with Daniel Shorno to do the sonification of this piece. But what I would like to mention that was really, really, really incredible, because the person that you see there, it actually was somebody that we don't know that came during the Nuit Blanche, and it was and she basically did it like half an hour improvised dance improvisation in the fog, in the cloud. I think I'll stop here because I'm short of time. Here's your questions. You can ask me questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much. So we had to speed it up, but it's such like a very fascinating and interesting project that you've just shown. So we have time for one single question now before switching to the next presentation. Anyone in the public?
Was the different picture only done in a lab or also in the field? Est-ce que les photos qu'on a vues ont été faites uniquement en labo ou est-ce qu'elles ont été aussi faites sur terrain en fait?
Je réponds je ne sais pas en français, anglais. Well, all the images, OK. Well, toutes les images au début, c'est vraiment la recherche, on peut dire, plus scientifique. Et toutes les autres images, c'est la documentation d'installations d'art. C'est artistique. C'est la documentation des vraies présentations en public, on peut dire. Do I have to translate in English? No, ça va.
So don't be frustrated with the question. We're gonna have more time next to like merge questions with all presentations. So we're gonna jump to Carly's presentation now.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you very much to everyone for putting on this excellent event. We're switching from an artist to a scientist here, so the visuals will get less nice as we go. But all right, how do I? Perfect. Okay. So I am a professor of biology at Concordia University, where I've been leading an urban ecology lab for about the last 5 years. But I have been fascinated with urban nature for a much longer time than that. And I feel incredibly lucky. I'm going to put my timer on so I don't go over my 10 minutes. I feel, oh, perfect. I feel incredibly fortunate that I have been able to, make a career out of essentially playing in the mud. But instead of playing in the mud in my parents' backyard alone, I now get to do it with an incredible network of people. And so all the work that I show you is work that I have done with my lab, who are up there in that top corner, all those wonderful, bright young people. And also we work very often with a number of collaborators from design to engineering and many community groups as well. And what we try and think about as researchers, as scientists, is how can we better understand and ultimately better manage all of the amazing urban green spaces that we have throughout our cities to support other species that we share our cities with, biodiversity, but also to support ourselves to improve our health and our well-being, what we might call ecosystem services. And really what underlies all of this is that green space is critical infrastructure. I think often we think of nature as nice to have. Like if we have everything else, it's nice. If we have some flowers, if we have some nature. But really the same way that we need to maintain the buildings that we're in, the roads that we drive and bike on, we need to be able to grow and maintain our green infrastructure if we want resilient cities, particularly in a changing future, in a changing climate. And when we think about all of that wonderful green infrastructure, trees are incredibly important when it comes to climate change and climate resilience. This is true, we don't see this just in our climate plan here in Montreal, but in strategic climate plans, forestry plans in city after city who are trying to increase their urban canopies. And in our lab, we work with trees often. We do things, really low-tech things, like going out with our string and duct tape and measuring trees to understand how much carbon they store, how much flooding they can mitigate. We do slightly more fun and higher-tech things, like build weather stations that we can take out on bicycles and map the temperature of the city to understand how trees can help us to fight urban heat islands. And all of this climate change, mitigation and adaptation that trees contribute to is really important in a city like Montreal, where we are facing increasing and more intense heat waves. When I was young, we would see 1 to 2 weeks of the year over 30 degrees Celsius here in Montreal. And by the time I retire from my job at Concordia, we'll see almost 55 days of our summer in those temperature ranges that are increasingly dangerous and that we know really disproportionately impact the most vulnerable residents of our cities. And so as we do this work of mapping and measuring and monitoring, this question keeps coming back about what do we do about this? Which trees do we plant and where do we plant them? Those are the questions everybody wants to know from a scientist who studies trees and climate. And this question, this is the most common question I get asked when I talk to the media, when I talk to my colleagues, when I talk to my uncle at the dinner table. They want to know, what is the best tree? Which one do I pick? And I really don't like this question. Not because I don't have lots of favorite trees that I could recommend to all of you, because I do, but because there is no best. It depends on what we want. Do you want a tall, beautiful shade tree that will reduce your energy bill or cool your yard or store lots of carbon? Do you want a beautiful flowering cherry that is going to bring in bees and birds and joy to your day in the springtime? You can have both of those things, but probably not with the same tree, unfortunately. And it also really depends what else is around. And so this street, this is a lovely street. This is a street, I might like to live on. It looks cool, it looks shady. And after Emerald Ash Borer came through, it looked like this. And so when we don't build in, diversity, resilience into our urban landscapes, we take on a lot of climate risk. And this is where sometimes we see tension between, designers and ecologists, where we see over and over that people love the look of a really nice uniform tree canopy. We love those kissing canopies that arch over the street or that have beautiful blossoms, and those are unfortunately really impractical when it comes from trying to maintain the benefits that we want. And so it's really clear through our work that the diversity and the structure of our urban forest, it matters. It matters for people, it matters for nature. And increasingly, we've been thinking that the key to understanding this as scientists might be hiding in plain sight here in our own backyards. And this is because that's where most of our trees are. So when we look, this is just the city of Toronto because they have this nice slide where they've calculated this, but we see this city after city that more than half of our trees are not city-managed trees. They're trees on private property. They're trees on campuses and around homes and businesses and churches. And we don't know a lot about these trees. So we have these really wonderful open data sets of trees. This is a blurry picture of Montreal's forestry data set that you could look up yourself. And it looks really nice and complete until you zoom in and you see all the missing dots, all those trees in the yards of these houses. This is near Loyola campus where I work in NDG. And we don't know if this half a data set that we have is actually representative of the urban forest as a whole. So we're making decisions about our forests, we're making decisions about our climate based on really incomplete information. And this is what my wonderful graduate student Kaylee wanted to tackle when she started in the lab, is to look at all of these different spaces. And she had this wonderful plan of going door to door and measuring people's trees, and she was ready to launch this plan in March of 2020. And very quickly, we told her she couldn't be the typhoid Mary of COVID and be going door to door in people's backyards, and she pivoted to a wonderful community project where she asked the people around her to help her out and go into their yards and take their children they were homeschooling and measure their trees with a piece of string and take photos and send her that data. And she had wonderful help from Maya there, who was an undergraduate with us. And gradually restrictions lifted, and Kaylee was able to create this incredible plot around our campus that had every tree in a school or a place of worship or a public park or on a street, and all of these houses in red that sent in their data. And this is the only scientific figure I'm going to show you today, so I'm going to walk you through it. But basically, as we sample trees, we find one tree. We look at another tree. It's probably a different species. We look at another tree. It's probably a different species. As we keep doing that, we start to see the same species again. And so we get this curve where we're not finding more species anymore. And in our institutions and our street right-of-ways and our parks, we hit those plateaus pretty quickly where we had found all the tree species in the neighborhood. And in blue there in our private yards, we kept finding new species, new species, new species. And of our sample in our one neighborhood, 30% of the tree species we found were only on the private land. And so our urban forests are more diverse than we give them credit for. This is good news. We also looked at a whole bunch of traits, things people love about trees. Do they have nice fall colors? Do they flower? Do they fruit? Are they tall and shady? And again, we see that on private land, we see a broader range of these traits that are preferred by people than what we find just in our public tree inventory. So our urban forest might be more multifunctional. They might be giving us more benefits than we give them credit for. And while we were doing this at Concordia, we didn't know this when we started, but right here at UQAM, there was a very similar project going on where my colleague Alain Paquette, also an urban forester, also concerned about our data, was starting to categorize trees around this campus. And we've talked a lot about how some of the things we found are the same, but others are different. And why? Is it because our campus is more residential than yours, or the neighborhood is wealthier than yours? And so what we've done now, it's my last slide, I promise. What we've done now is launched the Urban Forest Observatory, or what we sometimes call the Montreal Tree Project. And this is led by Emma Bacon, where we have expanded to 25 plots across the island of Montreal that span different types of neighborhoods, different socioeconomic conditions, different human population densities, to learn more about all the trees we have and the contributions that they can make. And we're hoping to roll out a community science piece of this where people can contribute their own data as well.
Thank you, Carly. Thank you so much. So it's going to be hard to keep my questions till the end of the presentations, but we have time for one question from the audience, spectators, public. So who wants to jump in?
There's also online if somebody wants to chat in.
It's open? Okay, no one has question. Thanks, Carly, for your presentation. It's amazing to see your work, and I'm super happy to see you with the hexagram community because we don't have so much time to see each other at Concordia. But my question is more, okay, like you work with the private trees, like, or trees on private land, and just earlier we had this question about in the other panel. You were probably not arrived, but we had this questioning about publics and the importance of public engagement and the challenges brought by public engagement. And I'm just curious, how do you develop those or how do you develop and sustain those relationships with private land owners and different stakeholders?
Yeah, that's a great question. So different ways. So a lot of this work is really done through our students who are incredible and have time to make these relationships. But often what we try and do, instead of trying to work, one-on-one with every individual landowner, because that's really difficult when you have many, is find these kinds of boundary spanning organizations who can help. And so, for example, like the Cochairs or neighborhood community groups who are interested in greening or gardening, so that they can serve as a little bit of a liaison between our projects and individual members of the public who might be interested in participating or contributing. And so that's one of the ways we try and get in touch. But then also it's really important that we're able to give this work back to, like, if we're going to come and be on your land and use your space, and we don't want to be extractive in our research. And so we try and work again through giving public webinars or talks at the library or other methods where we can share what it is that we've learned and reach back out to individuals.
Thank you so much. You've stolen my question, Alice. I have to find another one. Thank you so much, Carly. So we're gonna now let Martin do his presentation. Martin is online with us. Martin, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Oh, great.
So I will share the screen with you.
Yeah.
So I would like first to thanks everybody to come, and especially Gisèle and Nina for the invitation. And thanks, Brice, for those conversations you will bring later with all of us. So my presentation today, I will try to focus to show this relationship in my work that are related to the recycling of residual matter that came mostly from industry of forest, mining, and agriculture, and how those research and creation are also interlinked with communities, lands, and territories. So in the research, I work especially with different field of research also, but the basic at the problematic is to how that we can reuse those materials that are produced by mining, forestry, and agriculture. There are plenty of those kind of residue that can be transformed and be transformed in a way that we can reuse them in different process. And the one that I take with my team of research, it's how we can create a new kind of materiality that we will be able to 3D printing. So the idea is to give a second life to those material. And the intersectorial approach allows us to focus on different areas in those research. So we're mixing art, engineering, and natural science. Me, I have the part more related to artists or designer. And with my team, I work with some of my colleagues are more in the field of engineering for the electronic part, and also more in natural science for the production of a biomaterial. So the general idea is to at the same time to rethink the method of manufacturing, but also this new relationship we can establish with the process and nature. And I will define today like 3 lines of research that are related to art and design, technology, and also environment and society. So in the first one, the idea is to produce at the end, of course, material, but it's also to use them in different fields. So the field of art, it's more related to artistic expression, that they are integrate this relationship with the field or the land. So I try to use material that are produced on factory, and those material can be produced by mining. So the idea is to go on the land to, I don't know in English how to say, to prélève, to take the material from the space. This is a park of residue in a mining. So with this material, after that, we bring them in the lab, and we will develop in the process of transformation until the 3D printing, as you see, as a final project. So the idea is to connect with the land and also trying to work with this aesthetic of care and repair. The next line of research that's very important, we need to produce those artwork. We need also to first produce the material. So the idea is how we can characterize the material to see if it's toxic or not, how we can reuse it, and which will be the best process to do it. So we try to valorize at the same time traditional knowledge, but also more technical like 3D printing. We develop with different material like this one with wood, nanocellulose, and after we try to reintegrate that object in nature also for its property that can be biodegradable, or also give a revitalization of the lands because they produce some nutrient when they biodegradable. And the other aspect, the third one, it's important, are we can connect also with the community by working with co-creation and develop this methodology by trying to bring the industrial to work with us in some artistic project. It's a way to create a kind of sensibility, that an approach that it's different than engineering. And by this approach, it's also a way to communicate those issues that they are also environmental. So I will show you a short project. I will have a short video, like 2 minutes, to present you. This project was focusing more about archaeology, but also this idea that architecture provide in extreme environment some issue. And the idea was working with architecture in terms of how we can create sculpture or building that would look like in the process of fabrication or deconstruction. And that will show at the same time this precarity or state of change that it's related also to climate change. So I will show you some of those, focus some of those objects. That it's also trying to combine this cycle of life of object, that it's more biological in the process of creating new material, but also technological in terms that we try to create like hybrids between those architecture that provide references both from human manufacture, but also construction from insect or animals. So I will end the presentation with these videos. Donc voilà, merci de votre écoute.
Thank you so much, Martin, for your work and presentation. So we have questions. Maybe we have questions from the audience, on the online audience. Gisèle?
Nothing yet, but we're waiting. We want comments from online.
It's loading, maybe. Okay, so we have time for like a real person questions. So do we have like any physical, tangible questions?
Maybe I have one. Allô, Martin?
Oui, bonjour Gisèle.
I enjoyed in your documentation that there was a variety of sources. So we would see the object made, but we would also see other kinds of imagery, which would seem to come from maybe from the media, or I wasn't too clear on what I was looking at some points, but I did enjoy the fact that there was a variety of things. But could you talk about, seemed to be an instance where people were in a gymnasium or something like that. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, but those image was coming from media. So it was around the migration phenomenon that they can observe in different borders around the world. And the idea was to think or rethink this architecture, that it's have a kind of mobility or fragility, vulnerability that disappear over time. We don't have any history for those, I would say, kind of build or place that they are made. And I would like with the project and those sculpture create kind of a photograph, if I can say in 3D, of those shape that can represent this process of construction and deconstruction at the same time, that are related more in the stage of transformation in something bigger like climate change or migration.
Merci. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martin. So stay with us. We're gonna have like a common talk like in about 10 minutes. Sandeep, no pressure. That's the cue for your presentation now. So whenever you're ready.
So while this is happening. Thank you. So while this is still happening, I want to thank also the Gisèle and Nina and everybody who is involved in organizing this event, and my great co-speakers. I will go to something that's much more abstract than all the concrete things that you mentioned. My material is time. Musicians' materials generally is time. So that's intangible from the get-go. And as somebody who works a lot with time, one of the things that has been bothering me about our crises that we have is that there's a lot of presentism. And the essence of what we are experiencing is a temporal event. So our actions influence things far in the future, much further in the future than we can ever imagine or feel. So we don't feel it. We see the curves, we see everything, but we don't have any feeling for the things that will happen in 1,000 years. So one of the, and the Earth moves in different time scales. So I thought I'll start slowly and with something very simple. I will start with, what is the trick? Okay. I will start with asking a question about how we as musicians use time. And one of the terms that comes to mind is synchronicity. So over the past 10 years, so 10 minutes for 10 years, I have looked at the central concept of synchronicity in music. Being together, as musicians call it. This has many different ways of existence in music. So there's one, especially in music, with a beat or a groove. This means a kind of kinesthetic feeling of bodily engagement. In music made on digital audio workstations, it means a kind of clock sync, being together. In orchestra music, it means a kind of interconnected but vari-speed movement. You know, the conductor conducts, and it's all of a social kind of mediation of togetherness. And just to take another kind of music, North Indian art music, it means a relational interdependent speed evolution. So the speed changes in a way that is interdependent between the musicians, and it's always accelerating. So what does being together mean? Already many different things. And my work in the last 10 years has been about a relational heterophonic temporal concept, which I call elastic time. So that where sequences in events are tightly organized in one perspective, but not in any other. So they're aligned, but not synchronized. And that allows for different individual latitudes of the performers as to what their density of time might be in a given moment. I call this comprovisation. So, as I said before, on our planet, the geologic processes, biological evolutions, and what François Julien calls the silent transformations of climates may be interdependent in some causal ways or relational ways, but they're utterly indifferent to being in sync. It's not a concept that is very useful in regard to this. Interactions often happen so unpredictably and so unrhythmically that any musician in a band would be fired if they behaved like that. In real life, sync moments and being in the groove are so rare in our world that the Greek philosophers had a word for such a curiosity. They named it kairos. So a few years ago, it suddenly dawned on me that most musics are pleasurable to us because they manufacture this precise feeling, this precious feeling of kairos. And they do it in unnatural amounts, in heightened amounts, in a density, frequency, and quantity that is not natural. Kairos moments are the equivalent of sugar in a sense. Sugar is rare and precious in nature, but very frequent in highly processed food. So music making is one of the things that separate human interactions from the processes of the planet and produce an alternate, very sweet, excited reality. And like sugar and other alternate realities, this cannot be totally healthy for us. So our addiction to groovy kairos-based music is related to our inability to feel urgency with regard to climate processes, especially when they are large and seemingly very boring. We only take note of them when they converge on catastrophic events, but geological and climatic processes work on our world with the same force, whether in times of climate optima or during storms, earthquake, and tsunamis, or in times of calm. Has our kairos addiction made us emotionally insensitive to these slow, boring, but very powerful transformations that affect us? Is music as we practice it today thus one of the drivers of anthropogenic climate change? So that's a question. Would say, okay, then we do music without coordination, without synchronicity, without kairos. But can there be any music without any feeling of togetherness in time? Without our tuning the world to our perception, to our interhumanly synchronized time? Would the music without sync not be the very opposite of what we call music normally? Even John Cage proposed a common clock time for coordination of his sonic artworks, and even Murray Schafer relied on temporal, often groovy sound marks that focus our listening processes. Over the past 4 years now, I've tried to explore what anti-kairos music might mean in reality in given musical practice. I will show 3 projects that where I've tried this, and it's very basic, very elemental. So the first one is called How to Inhabit This Different Temporalities, a fitting thing. And I will just play it. You can ask questions later. I'll move to another moment. Doesn't want it. So basically everybody has a different metronome and the audience gives the musicians the metronome. This work will be performed at Musée des Beaux-Arts in Montreal in 1 month, on 20th of April. So you can come and see for yourself and influence the piece yourself. The next, what's the next? Okay, no, hi. Next, okay. Next is Zwitschermusik, twittering music. It's very soft. So that's 4:45 in the morning, and the birds are just waking up, and a few people in the village that hosted this event came out to sing with the birds, having a score of mine in their ears. The next one is this. And again, I would like to scroll forward if I can. Come on. No. There should be sound already. Yeah, but there should still be sound. I don't hear the sound. Ah. Again, different metronomes. Every musician has their own metronome. And that's the beginning of the piece, and then they change the metronomes in different ways all through the piece. The videos are all on YouTube. You can look at them if you want. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you so much. Beautiful presentation. Thanks everyone for fitting just right in time. So we've got more time to talk now. We can have like one more question from the physical or virtual audience. No, there is none. Okay.
Hi, Sandeep. Thank you for that sweet talking. I just have a question about the defaulting to the metronome as a way of measurement. And would there be, in your opinion, a different way of having a sense of time?
Well, the problem is that we're so conditioned to being together or experience music as something that happens together or not at all together, that this is an aesthetic device to show that they have different time scales that they work with. So it's not strictly necessary. We performed the same piece also without audible metronomes. They just had their own time scale that they were following. But it generated not the same feeling because the audience could not understand that they are following different time scales, just thought they were just roughly not being together.
Can I have a second question on that one?
I don't know, you have to ask Brice.
Well, I'm just curious about the fact that already the musicians have another time device within themselves, and whether that's something that we can consider. That we're always walking around with our own time devices, and the moment we no longer have those time devices, we're basically dead.
Yeah, but that is also something that they have consciously trained over years to ignore. So if suddenly, so maybe after 100 years of this practice, we don't need the metronomes anymore. But until then, it's also a way to get the musicians to stay in different times, because one thing that we have very strongly is our interhuman connectivity. And so once we leave a few musicians in a room, they will synchronize. And that's what I wanted to avoid in exploring this. So that was the device to do that, because they're familiar with it.
There's maybe one more question for Sandeep, and then we can go into the questions that Brice has prepared for us tonight. There's a question from Anthony Seberg. Hello, Sandeep. Could we say that anti-kairos is similar to when an audience claps out of time with the performers?
It is in a way, but it's still that is a very presentist thinking still. Anti-kairos is really about the co-presence of many scales of times. We cannot consciously do that in a performance. That's impossible. So we always have this slice of time, and there are levels in the bird piece and in the other pieces that are so slow that we cannot show it in a short 1-second video, because the one hit that comes every half hour, it wasn't there, so we don't hear it. So that kind of diversity of time scales is, I think, the point of anti-kairos.
Well, what about, because here we talk very much about rhythm, but what about if we would focus instead of rhythm on, let's say, melody, because then rhythm is kind of secondary and the melody is kind of like an expression that everybody can have on their own. This is just a...
Yes. So we're talking about a kind of a research attitude where I just focus on one thing at a time. Everybody who knows my music has worked that I work constantly with melody. That's actually what I normally work with. And I wanted to reduce this to very specific things that have to do with raw time perception. And in both videos, the musicians actually play it. So the bird video and the museum video, they play melodies, but these are subservient to the idea of time in this particular piece. And as I say, if this practice continues for 100 years, maybe we have other pieces. Then I'm playing the large game, you know.
So before we keep on going with the questions, can we just put Martin back on the screen so that we feel like he is with us in presence? Thank you so much for, like, I feel like it's pretty great that we ended up with you, Sandy, because I feel like this notion of time could be like the thread to keep on having our discussion, especially the question of attunement with all the different disparities, scarcities, trees, ecological time, human time, maybe even biological time that we need to attune with. And I feel like this question of time is quite interesting in all different practices, and I had like 1,000 different questions, but I feel like having a general question for all of you could like help us fostering like a better dialogue and discussion. So I feel like talking about like residual time, for instance, for Martin, or about water scarcity, all these things that are going to happen, but we're not able to grasp them in any ways within your own practice that goes from science, let's say, to art, music, design, and science for Martin as well. What are the different tools and that help you leveraging these questions with an audience, with a public, with spectators? There's Bruno Latour, we talked a bit before about the question of matters of concern. When the research goes out of the lab and reaches the public, how do you make sure that you can like go beyond the aesthetic for our fellow artists, or beyond just the scientific knowledge and reach up different audiences? It's a long question.
Yes, it is. Okay. I would like to Well, sort of in relation with everything else that was said. And I think that's one of the reasons why I focused in my presentation saying the question that I participated in, because I think it is, and it comes from my interest or sort of philosophical thinking about quantum physics and, well, Karen Barat that uses agential realism and quantum physics, that basically answers that we get are very much related to the questions we ask. So the questions we ask and answers we get are kind of inseparable. And I think even in our discussion about the time, that's exactly it. I mean, it depends on what kind of question we ask. So if we ask about the question about the rhythm, then as a marker of time, that's a one way of a question. But then obviously we can ask a variety of different questions that are going to produce different answers. Going back to my own creations and art practice, I think in my art practice, what I focus is on the creation of different platforms, what I call platforms of exchanges. So it's kind of, I see it as the installation as a space, place, and time to encounter, to exchange, so in a sense to be in time, in temporality of time, and at the same time bring all kinds of questions at the same time. So in my case, there were a mixture of questions of scientific research, but also an artistic way of trying to process that question and trying to bring a larger sensibility to the question of water, to the question actually of water being inseparable part of everything what we do in our life, from drinking water when we are thirsty, from food that we eat, from clothes that we wear, from cars that we drive, from cell phones that we use, and to just kind of become more sensible to water presence, whether it is a one water droplets or whether it is a cloud which you can touch and move through. And I think this aspect of the kind of visceral experience that you have in the temporality of a given place and space and time.
Okay. I'm trying to think where to start with your question. So I think in terms of time, I was really struck when you were talking about how we find it so hard to imagine these incredibly long time periods. I teach introductory ecology and evolution, and so trying to convey those concepts of, evolutionary time and millions and billions of years to students, it's very hard. And so I appreciate, thinking of other methods that we can convey this. I think often when I'm thinking of time in terms of my own research, I think of it in a few different ways. On one sense, I think about very short time scales in terms of, daily. What is happening, when we're using environmental sensors or similar, we're often looking at what is happening over, a 24-hour period, like the ecological processes that are happening during the day and at night can be very different in terms of the effects of, what you're planting on heat waves or some of these really concrete things. In terms of more forward-looking, how we design our cities, how we put in place new, nature-based solutions or practices to improve our cities, we are thinking forward in time, but to a lesser extent than what you're thinking about in these long scales. I think often, particularly if you're working, with scenarios or kind of future visioning or working with the public, the like rule of thumb that I always hear is that people can imagine their grandchildren, but not much further. And so if you say, okay, think about the city you want in 50 years, that's tangible. That's like on, a few generations time scale, but much further than that, and it becomes very difficult to imagine those futures. And so I'm often thinking within those, few decades time spans, which lines up well with some of the, if you're going to plant a tree, you're not going to feel the effects of that for several decades in many cases. And so we are I'm trying to think ahead, but not so far ahead in that way. I think the other part of your question, which is a little separate to me from time, is this idea of like matters of concern and how we convey our research and how we get research out there. I don't know if you want me to answer that now or continue on time and then come back.
I mean, as you wish. I think it's quite linked actually, because the time of research needs time in a way, but in the same time we're like not in emergency. We don't feel it right now here, but in some places we do. So I think it's quite related.
Yeah, so I guess in that sense, one thing that really strikes me about it, for scientists and kind of getting your research out there and making your research, useful, which is what I want to do as an applied scientist, the timescales of like politics and decision making are so different from the timescales of research. And so often, you might get a call from someone in the municipal government or the federal government, and they'll say, okay, we need you to comment on this right now for this policy that's coming out. And it's like, okay, you're calling me to ask a question about pollinators in the city of Montreal in the winter when like we haven't started collecting the data, and you're like, well, how did you think that timescale was going to line up? And so I think often I've had to think a lot more about how do we make connections up front in the research process to make sure, rather than trying to be kind of reactionary and having someone reach out and say, okay, do you have the answer to this problem? Trying to think ahead and saying, what are the answers that you need? And can we figure this out together? And what is the time scale for doing this? To try and better align some of these timescales of policy and research that can move very, very differently. And so that's where my mind often goes as a scientist in terms of trying to think about trying to think about my research actually being like used out in the world and not sit in an academic article or sit in a filing cabinet or a half-finished undergraduate paper somewhere.
Is Marta going to say?
Yes, that's yours. But I can maybe since you've been talking about temporalities a lot, maybe I can send another question to you. That's more about the reception of the audience to like being attuned or detuned from their own natural time and having this like very deep and embedded experience in sometimes museums, but also like outdoor environments. What kind of outcomes do you have, and do you have like this? I'm interested into the outcomes, the way you collect. Outputs from participants, whether they're musicians or whether they are actually like just participants.
That depends on the project. In the outdoors projects, often there is no distinction between musicians and participants or audience. It's the same people. For me, again, I do not care so much for immediate data collection. For me, the data collection happens if somebody wants to do it again. That's the real data. Everything else is kind of facile. You can say that you liked it, you can say that you didn't like it, you can say that you had a deep experience, or you can say not. I don't believe any of that. So the only real outcome is if somebody wants to do that again, or experience that again. And one of the things that I'm struggling with in my profession is this presentism, that it's event-based, and that it can only happen at a certain time, and it needs a certain amount of money, and then it's gone. And until somebody else puts it up, maybe 20 years go by, and it's in another continent. So the same people cannot experience the same thing again. And while all these things are kind of didactic also, I mean, fairly absconded from the realm of music in the sense of performance concert music. Still, the things are still performed in this context, but I don't see that as a viable venue for this kind of thinking. So that's why they're in museums, they're in open spaces where anybody can come in. The percussion piece was in a hallway where people were walking through at 6 o'clock in the evening on their way home or on their way to the next classes or whatever. So they didn't know that something would be happening there. And then they stayed. And they stayed for half an hour and they just stayed. And that's for me enough data collection. I don't need to ask them afterwards.
So I like that you bounce back on the sense of the aesthetical experience and things that you cannot quantify in a way. And it drives me to ask a question to, my microphone is working. Yeah, it is. Yeah, hello. Yeah. To Martin, I didn't forget you, because since like we've seen a lot about the process, and maybe this question applies to you as well, Anna, because we've seen a lot about the scientific process of reusing the residues and creating all these shapes that haven't been that much described, I guess, in your work. And I felt a lot this kind of German philosophy, design, form, function that went through your process. But what about the aesthetical experience and the forms and the symbolic of the forms that you're developing in your different work in relation to the material that you're implementing in these sculptures that you're making?
Thanks for your question. I think your question, I want to make a link between temporality and also the way we have to mobilize knowledge specifically in research and creation. And I think they have a part of the time that's something that we can measure in science. And I think in art and aesthetic, time, something different that we feel when we have an experience with an object. And I will also try to focus to another kind of time that may be more the process of making things. And I try to, when I build each object, that those objects have a kind of story in it, that you can look at them and have a part of them you're not able to define properly. I like also the way that in the process, it's more technical, but it's also meanings, the layers of 3D printer. It shows when you look on those objects, a temporality, like it's like sedimentation. So the object reveals something about time that for me it's similar to photography in a certain way. And so it's object that take times to make, and I think it's visible in the shape of the process of transformation and also the process of accumulation. And I think as maybe other participants here, that it's very hard. I think they have a kind of data or an experience you cannot replace with data in art experience. And I think knowledge comes also from experience in life. You know things because you experiment them. Someone can try to explain you those things without you experiment them, but it's not the same when you are in it and you live them as an experience. And I think art is something like that too. You need to be in front of sculpture or image to fully understand. And I think from that, from your own experience, you will learn some things too. So I think the traduction of aesthetic to data, it's something complicated sometimes. And I think you cannot replace the experience. I think we should focus more on research about the legitimacy of artwork itself to bring knowledge, I think.
I have a question for you. Yeah, I have a friend who sings to trees, who has been singing to trees for many years. And he says he doesn't sing randomly to any trees, but to the trees in the forest surrounding his house, which is in the Alps in Austria. And so he says the reaction of a tree, so the data that is being collected about this aesthetic experience that the tree might or might not have, is when the tree seems to grow better. and which will take a year or so to really manifest itself, or at least a few months. Is that data collection, could this somehow be a kind of a correlation between artistic engagement, listening beyond the human, how do non-human things perceive the world in ways that we don't understand yet? And is this something that you have research on or experience with?
So it's not something I personally have research on, but there certainly is research on the response of plants to, to music, to playing music, to, I'm sure, to singing as well. And I think often we can kind of empathize or think of, if you talked about, oh, well, I sang to an animal and it responded, that would be very intuitive. And people would say like, yeah, of course it did. It's, it's an animal, it's a living thing and has behaviors. Plants are also living things with complicated, behaviors. They grow, they respond. And so I wouldn't be surprised if singing to a tree, elicits a response. I think often for me, where these kinds of art science collaborations can be really powerful, and this comes back to what Martin was just saying about the kind of knowledge mobilization, is just bringing people's attention to nature and having them think about nature in a different way, and think about particularly a kind of sense of place in a different way, what we value, what we perceive from the natural world that we might otherwise just kind of walk by and not notice. And that's maybe part of why we see so many kind of art, exhibitions happening in natural spaces. I was struck by your Twitter something, your early morning bird. Yes, your early morning bird music, how it was in this really beautiful natural space. And often, so in some of our work, we work closely with local kind of community groups, and often activists and advocates who are trying to protect particular green spaces, and often kind of informal green spaces. So they're not parks, sometimes they're at risk of development. They're kind of these ephemeral spaces that are maybe seen by decision makers as like empty or wasted space, but are seen by communities as very well-loved spaces. And one of the most powerful ways of drawing attention to these spaces is art. It almost always starts with art or an artist, and then eventually they seek out the scientists, and they're like, oh, can you also contribute some data or some information to help us understand the value of this space? But art as a tool for bringing people to a space and better like seeing that nature in a different way is incredibly powerful.
I just wanted to mention that the space that you saw is actually a human space. It is toxic fields where toxic waste lies underneath, and every tree, you couldn't see that very well, but every tree is stunted. So it's a profoundly unnatural space that has grown over, and is used, or art is being used to re-engage with the space. It looks very beautiful, but it's actually, you're not allowed to eat any of the fruit to plant anything there, or so it's a very toxic space.
Which is also common, that we ruin these spaces essentially, and then we often kind of write them off because they're and I think, rather than seeing that space as something that is, that is toxic or that is no good, thinking of coming back to time, what is the potential of that space? Can we restore it? Or what is the value that it still has for people? But I think there is incredible, data to be collected at this kind of art-science interface that maybe scientists don't typically think of as data, but that can be really compelling.
Perhaps there's a question from the audience that, if you don't mind, Anna, go ahead, and we could have someone. And I'd like to say data as experience. I'm just throwing that in there.
I just would like to comment about the art science, since we were talking about it. So, and it comes from, in a sense, two ways. But I think that art is a way of producing knowledge, and so we have to acknowledge that. And as I said earlier, it depends. Art can bring different questions that science doesn't necessarily ask. And through those exchanges, something new or something different can happen. And this is precisely what happened in our collaboration between scientists and myself. And that goes back also to the question of time in a different way, because I think it's what is really important to spend time together, to understand each other's languages together, because of education system that we have, and we've been educated we are very much siloed into different disciplines. So sometimes I know for myself, I had to sort of go extra mile to learn about a science, and it does take time to work together, and our, in a sense, proposition for a new way of collecting water from fog, it happened through what I call this creative interaction. So there's not a specific moment that I can pinpoint, oh, this was a moment that happened. It happened because we were working together, we spent time together, we invested individually and together to trying to understand each other, and also working with materials, because it was also in response to materiality that this image of the forest came. And so I truly, because I live through it, I truly believe that the art-science collaborations are very important, and that artists can contribute to scientific research, but we have to create those environments and platforms where it can happen. So it cannot happen in sort of 5 seconds. It takes time as well.
So since we're back into attunements, language, and between disciplines, I suggest that we attune a bit more with the audience. We have still time for questions. Suggestions. So do we have anyone online or in the public? Yes.
Hello. So I'm working actually, interestingly, with plants, time movement, and between cinema and vegetal biology. I'm trying to see how the cinematic apparatus can be adapted for a better understanding of plant movement, which actually interestingly enough, it's changing the camera into a time machine. So I was wondering, so I'm thinking about what it is that this time that we have committed to in the industrial era, and how, Sandeep, if you could expand on the metronome in this context, where, of course, everybody has their own temporalities, but we talked about, you know, our own time, but that time, elastic time, right, that is changing with the pulsation of our heart, is never that of a machine. And that of a machine as well is subjected to its own materiality and slows down, or it's going to gradually accelerate depending on whatever is moving it, right? So I was wondering, how do you see this connection in your work between this mechanical imposed time that actually is what triggers synchronicity, and every other temporality that is involved in a piece?
Yeah, maybe it's a case of using the master's tools to break down the master's house. So it is, as I mentioned before, it is a decision that has to do with the sociality of the situation that these people experience the art. So if I just had said, everybody has their own time, and we know that, it would have been a very banal proposition. But the fact that they have a metronome in front of them that tells you that they're not on their own time, yet all the metronomes are different. and the audience can go and change the tempo of the metronome, so that the musician is not at all in control of the metronome and sometimes plays the same melody in a very short time, sometimes has a lot of time to play the same melody. So that kind of thing was an aesthetic device in order to make it crystal clear to anyone who comes into that space, because the overarching time was that it was 3 days long. So whenever you came, you were in the middle of the process. You were not at the beginning or at the end in any way. And you couldn't oversee anything. You were just entering this room at some random point and you saw this thing happening and you figure out what they're doing. And there were these cards that had metronome markings on them, which is a universally acknowledged way of saying there's a certain time, temporality. And you gave them to the musicians and the musicians took them and changed their metronome and then played on. So that was a kind of an artistic device. It is not, actually I have to use this artistic device because it is a cultural convention precisely that everybody knows. And then therefore can understand the import of what is happening there. So that's maybe my answer to this. The metronome as per se, of course, is something, especially if you have musicians like I did that never play with the metronome, like Iranian musicians or Syrian musicians, to whom the idea that there's a metronome that they have to play to is absurd, and it is absurd. Yet it sends the message. It's a theatrical or artistic device.
Because my
we have
feeling
about
that,
5 minutes left. It'd be great to just, if someone else would, they can continue the conversation with Sandeep one-on-one. But if there's maybe a last comment that someone would like to make in the room, and we will thank all our speakers tonight as well. Someone else like to intervene?
Yeah, my question is for Martin. In the case of your study, you're looking at how we can recycle materials in order to create a piece of art. With climate change and climate insecurities and the amount of waste that we have, do you think that we could scale up the technology that you're using in order to build like couches, houses, or other materials to be used for human consumption instead of creating new materials for that?
So they already made it. So you have different technology that exist actually to use cement, that they work similar ways that the machine we use. So you can build houses, and depending different type of material you use, you can have different shape because the material react differently. So it's not something necessarily I would like to go myself because it requires a lot of research that they are more focused on engineering. But I like this idea that you can live in a space and experiment a space from the interior. But if they have some opportunity, I would like to try also those kind of things.
Merci.
So I think it's time to wrap it up. I think it's a wrap. Thank you, everyone. Carly, Sandeep, Anna, Martin, public, Hexagram, everyone, Gisèle as well in the back that organized this beautiful talk. Thanks, Laser 13. Thanks, Max on the camera over there, the technical team and everyone. And Nina, of course. Nina, thank you so much. So we're going to wrap up the session. I think you'll have time to talk. I will just wish you a beautiful, wonderful evening and life, and and see you around.